Only in wrestling, eh? Whereas most practical jokes focus around hacking into someone's Facebook or tricking them on the phone, in the world of professional wrestling you can be lumbered with a gimmick that exists simply to take the mick out of you. How that helps anyone I don't know, but sports entertainment is littered with examples of this, some of which are so nuts you can't help but wonder what everyone was thinking. It's like it was okay that failure was clearly on the cards because we could laugh at someone for a while. Well, that makes sense to me. I'm Simon from What Culture, and this is 10 wrestling gimmicks which were massive rips. Number 10, creative control. Whether or not Vince Russo was responsible for WWE's success throughout the Attitude Era will be a point of contention seemingly forever, but what's a little more cut and dry is the time he spent running WCW. That wasn't so great. Aside from the series of bizarre decisions he made, Russo also found the time to take shots at his former employer, which was likely not the best idea given that at the time World Championship Wrestling needed all the help they could get. That fell on deaf ears' mind as Vince thought up Creative Control, a duo made up of the Harris twins, that would be his personal muscle, because, you know, he was the head of creative. Smart. The real humdinger were their names. One was called Patrick and the other Gerald, which, yes, was a slight at Pat Patterson and Jerry Briscoe. So all of this was just a big you to the WWE, and it helped nobody because of course it didn't. Much like Russo in WCW, didn't last all that long. Number 9, Freddie Joe Floyd. This one barely makes any sense either, but maybe we could say that about most of pro wrestling. When WWE had Tracy Smothers on their books, a talent many considered underrated, Vince McMahon thought the best use of him was to be a punchline. Again, I don't know. So given that there was a relationship with Jerry and Jack Briscoe, whose real names were Gerald Floyd and Freddie Joe, we got Freddie Joe Floyd, a proverbial jobber who did absolutely nothing of note. Presented as an outright loser from day one, it's a gimmick few remember, because why would they? There were some ramblings that Smothers had a run-in with The Undertaker backstage which could explain this, but either way, from a 2018 point of view, it just seems like one giant waste of time. Number 8, Khazzani. The gimmick of Khazzani wasn't a rib on anyone in wrestling in particular, and instead was just a jibe at the traditions of the business itself. Once more, it doesn't really have much merit beyond that. Debuting on SmackDown in 2008 with a Pig Latin-esque name, which was also part of the funnies, Khazzani was kinda pitched as Jake Roberts meets Doink the Clown as he delivered promos from a fun fair. He debuted in January 2009 to Little Buzz, and was gone shortly after because how was this ever going to work? The idea itself was niche at best, and given he was treated like a joke, that's how the fans took him too. Number 7, Little Davey Meltzer. Don't really need to explain this one, but we shall do anyway. But yes, despite years of naysayers and negative words, Dave Meltzer is one of, if not the voice when it comes to wrestling journalism or an analytical perspective of the industry. For my money, he's earned that right, but you can go argue about that in the comments. Why some sections of the business may pretend he doesn't exist too, they're all aware of him, hence why after Meltzer had lambasted the UWF in the 90s, promoter Herb Abrams named a jobber Davey Meltzer and sent him to the ring to get destroyed by Steve Williams, who also stuffed a copy of The Observer down his throat. I'm sure Dave was horrified, and I'm also sure half the fans in attendance that night sat there going, what the flip is going on? Number 6, Willie Watts. Bill Watts was not a good human being, or so it seems. He may have been solid at booking wrestling shows, but as a person he sucked, as demonstrated by Paul Heyman. Recalling a segment on WCW TV where Heyman and Medusa had garnered the highest ratings on that night's TV, Watts remarked, according to Paul, that he was pissed off a Jew and a drew such a number. That's bad anyway, but as a Jew myself, it's doubly hard for me. Most people probably would have gone to the courts, but that's not Paul Heyman, who took a different route in ECW in 1994. With Joey Styles on sabbatical, Heyman drafted in an African-American known as Willie Watts, which was a clear shot at his former employer and the recent racism storm that had lost Watts' job. So yes, Paul Heyman came up with a character just to take a shot at somebody else, but in this case, maybe it was kind of deserved. Number 5, Virgil. Virgil, also known as Mike Jones for some reason, became wrestling's poster boy for ribbing other individuals. He's genuinely very odd all around, but we'll start here with Virgil. Basically a jobber before he was repackaged as Ted DiBiase's lackey in the 90s, WWE also thought it'd be funny to call someone in this position Virgil, which was Dusty Rhodes' legit first name. So not only was this gimmick problematic to say the least to begin with, but it was also being used to insult talent in WCW just because we could. Somehow Virgil still had his moment in the sun when he won the $1 Million Championship from DiBiase at SummerSlam, but make no mistake about it, this was nothing more than a joke at Dusty's expense, which is why number 4, Hakeem. Oh boy, if it doesn't rain, it pours. Deciding that one-man gang had come to the end of the road, McMahon took George Gray, turned him into Hakeem, who was also known as, wait for it, the African Dream. If that sounds familiar, yes, it's another dig at Dusty Rhodes, who was the American Dream. Wrestling is petty. The other problem, much like Virgil, is that this was a horrendous gimmick and racist angle as manager Slick transformed a white man into a dancing, jive-talking African. I still can't believe this was ever allowed to be on TV. It happened though, depressingly, and thankfully was swept under the rug when someone realised this wasn't working on any level imaginable. I wonder why. Number 3, Tripp Bradshaw. It doesn't really matter who you are in the WWE. If someone backstage thinks you're ripe for the insult, they will jump on you like white on rice. This is what happened to JBL in 2017. Deciding that would be the year he'd continually trip over by accident while going about his duties, those behind the curtain found this so hilarious they named a 205 Live jobber after him. In short, the man's name was Tripp Bradshaw. Far more literal than maybe it had to be, this was still an entire person's run in World Wrestling Entertainment being fashioned because management wanted to point and laugh at Bradshaw. Given how much the Texan enjoyed doing that to other people, maybe it was just. Number 2, VK Wall Street. Even from the name you can see what WCW was trying to do here, and it's another of those situations where you have to question what exactly they were trying to achieve. I don't know, and this went down 22 years ago. But after being IRS in WWE for a brief minute, Mike Rotunda returned to World Championship Wrestling in 1996 to become VK Wall Street, a high-rolling banker-type dude who would shoot on the competition's New Generation era by calling them the Few Generation. Yeah. Sweet burn, man. The most obvious digs were his initials though, because of course behind the scenes VK stood for Vincent Kennedy of Vincent Kennedy McMahon fame. I don't really see what the insult was either. Wall Street was a successful rich guy. Also, you should forget the fact WWE didn't go public for years after this, because that would make the whole thing even more ridiculous than it already is. Number 1, Vincent. Back to Mike Jones, or Virgil, who found himself being used as a toy between WCW and WWE in the 90s to get their back and forth jokes about each other onto television. A worthy use of time, I'm sure you'll agree. Also happening in 1996, which is when this war was truly hotting up, Jones was brought into World Championship Wrestling to re-team with Ted DiBiase in the NWO. Becoming head of security for the group, he was given the name Vincent after one Vincent McMahon. Didn't have many ideas, did they? Of course, with this one it was tit for tat, given that before this he was dubbed Virgil, and don't think that it stopped there. When Russo arrived in 1999, Vincent got changed to Shane. Oh please, somebody give me strength.